So the topic I chose to do was violence in school. So school violence is a multifaceted problem that includes several types of physical, verbal, and psychological hostility, bullying, physical altercations, harassment, threats, and even more extreme acts like shootings are some ways it shows up. Some effects of schools and violence could be that victims' mental health and academic performance are negatively impacted by the hostile environment it creates. Causes for school violence includes discrimination, peer pressure, social marginalization, and a lack of effective dispute resolution techniques. So exploring through conflict theory, violence in schools. Conflict theory basically looks at society from angles of power dynamics, social inequality, and research competition. It was mainly developed by Karl Marx, but was further expanded by other sociologists like Max Weber and George Simmel. Um, some aspects of it are structural inequality. Basically, summarizing it is that there's differences in possibilities for achievement, funding, and access to high quality education. And oppressed groups may use violence to challenge these existing quo and assert their agency. There's also power dynamics, which is the relationship between, say, a student and a teacher or the principal or any authority. And when students feel excluded or disempowered, they may resort to violence as a form of gaining back that control. There's also socialization, which basically is that the predominant group or the majority will kind of promote their belief, customs, and values. And when someone doesn't really fit that norm, someone that's more like from a different ethnic background or underprivileged student, something like that, they are more likely to um, be victims of violence in school, or as a way and form of resistance, they could be committing acts of violence in schools. There's also a continuation of inequality. So basically, there are already hierarchies and power structures in place in the educational system, and it is maintained, which again just reproduces that social inequality. And these students may experience tensions and disputes in schools as a result of that. There's also competition for resources. So money, opportunities, and recognition. Students may have tension, and that could lead to violence. Then we have sociologist approach. First thing is the sociologists look at a larger structure, elements of society and the educational system, which could be resource scarcity, overcrowding classrooms, socioeconomic disparity, and insufficient funding for education. One way they can like look at it is through socialization, which is I talked about before, but basically there's norms, values, and behavior patterns, and um if you don't really fit the norm, you could be met with violence like bullying or harassment. And or you can act with the norm, what you think is the norm. So if you're a child in a family that grew up and experienced a lot of aggressive behavior, that is your norm. That was how you were socialized. And therefore, that's how you may resolve conflicts and therefore enact violence in schools. There's also the labeling theory, basically, which says that if you label someone or the student as a delinquent or troublemaker, they will just feed into that and view themselves as that. So it can lead to increasing sentiments of marginalization, which will again promote them to resort to violence in schools to kind of have a voice or retaliate. It's also feminist theory, which is in more tune with sexual violence and how women predominantly face that in schools from their male peers or perhaps male partners. Then we have proposed solutions, which is basically addressing structural inequities, challenging gender norms and expectations, implementing restorative justice practices, and implementing trauma-informed practices. So I'll go over those a little bit. So addressing social inequalities would just be systemic reform and to basically remove these systemic barriers to opportunity policies that address inequities in resource distribution and discipline, and also equal funding for schools. Then challenging gender norms and expectations is basically challenging the traditional version of masculinity that we have, and basically kind of eliminate this idea that men should exhibit their emotions and resolve conflict through aggression and things like that, and also implement such sex education programs that support healthy relationships and basically talk about consent and address concerns like sexual harassment and dating violence. Then we have restorative justice practices, which is kind of taking labeling theory into account, where instead of just labeling someone as a delinquent, we kind of do reformation. So there is an ability for the person to hold accountability, but also for them to try to make amends and talk about and come up with remedies. Then there's also implementing trauma-informed practices. So this is for people who have a lot of mental health issues that may act out violently because of that. Um, so this entails putting mental health support services in schools, training staff members and educators in trauma-informed teaching methods. And yeah, these were my references.